Welcome to the CUNY Graduate Center for a panel discussion commemorating the release of the Campus Crisis Toolkit, Strategies and Solidarity for the Rest of Us from SUNY Press. You can find it at your favorite bookstore in about a week or two. March 1st, is that the official? March 1st. We recommend your local bookstore or bookshop.org rather than Amazon. I'm Luke Waltzer. I'm director of the Teaching and Learning Center here at the Graduate Center and a faculty member in the Interactive Technology and Pedagogy Certificate Program and Digital Humanities Master's Program. This event is co-sponsored by the Teaching and Learning Center and by our friends and colleagues at the Futures Initiative. We together, the Futures Initiative and the TLC, are concluding a 9-year project co-leading the CUNY Humanities Alliance, which was a Mellon-funded initiative that deepened the programmatic relationship between the CUNY Graduate Center, the doctoral granting institution of the City University of New York, and 4 CUNY community colleges: LaGuardia Community College, Borough of Manhattan Community College, Gutman Community College, and Hostos Community College. That project was launched in 2016. The first semester was the semester that Trump was first elected. And the project was renewed for a second 5-year cycle in February of 2020. So when we began this project, we were already aware of the crisis of the university and how it had emerged and evolved over the previous generation, how the notion of austerity ideology had produced more than a generation of gradual disinvestment in public higher education, that a higher percentage of CUNY students were bearing the burden, the financial burden of their education, and all sorts of pressures that these converging facts created on those of us who work within the institution. We were not aware of how deepened these crises would become over the following decade, right? And since 2016, the university has seen crisis upon crisis upon crisis. Some of these crises have been the recognition of problems or challenges that had always been there, like food insecurity and housing insecurity for our students. Some of these crises have been public health crises, like the COVID-19 pandemic and the epidemic of gun violence on our campuses and in our schools. Some of these crises have been created by the institutions themselves, by mismanagement of finances or mismanagement of conflict on campus. Some of these crises, and especially the most urgent and existential in nature, have been visited upon the university by political actors who rightly see universities as central nodes in the project by which society defines itself, that how it produces and preserves its knowledge. Right? So these crises have layered upon one another, and now we're contending with artificial intelligence, which may be the last thing I say about AI tonight. So we're now in what can be considered a polycrisis, a convergence of crises that has become something more than the sum of its parts. The crisis feels persistent, and yet we're showing up and doing the work of the university and sustaining it. And that's where this book comes in, this remarkable book. And we are fortunate to have Kevin Gannon and Lisa Bartolomeo, who edited the book over the past couple years and are publishing it through SUNY Press. We are fortunate to have them with us today. They've assembled 25 essays from 40 contributors who represent a range of identities within the university: faculty, student, staff, administrator. Their essays are about crises big and small, responses that are more successful, less successful. And today's conversation will be about the themes that this book raises and how they show up in different experiences of the university. And then what we can do together as university workers to work towards a university in the future that lives up to some of the ideals that CUNY itself embodies around access, inclusion, and opportunity for members of its community. I want to start with some thank yous before we get into the program. I want to thank Miranda Fidock and Marwa Answar and the rest of the staff of the Teaching and Learning Center who've put this event together. I think we may be the first Graduate Center event that handed out drink tickets for the reception that follows. So I want us to hold on to our reputation as innovators. But I'm really grateful for their support and wisdom and commitment to this work. I want to thank Adashima Oyo and Shelley Eversley and Cathy Davidson and the Futures Initiative, our partners in many things, including but not limited to crime here at the Graduate Center. I want to thank our president, Josh Brumberg, who wanted to be here with us tonight, but is under the weather. And just note how fortunate I feel to be working at an institution under his leadership. I would have said this if he was here as well. He takes seriously his responsibility to protect and preserve the Graduate Center as a space for inquiry, debate, discussion, inclusion. And he also manages to stay upbeat and optimistic no matter what's happening in the news, what insults one of our students or faculty members might hurl at him. His optimism itself is a source of hope for all of us doing work within CUNY. So shout out to Josh. And now I'm pleased to invite my colleague, Cathy Davidson, Distinguished Professor of English and Digital Humanities, Data Analysis and Visualization here at the GC, the 2025 recipient of the Harold McGraw Junior Prize in Higher Education. I'd list her publications, but we only have an hour and a half. Cathy came to the Graduate Center in 2014 to found the Futures Initiative and has been an advocate for innovative and inclusive practices and structures in higher education. Since I've learned so much from collaborating with her and from her model, and she's going to share some thoughts about this remarkable book. So Cathy, please.
Good evening, everyone. This is actually my first event as an emerita. And so I wrote things out because it's very emotional. I love this place. CUNY is incredibly special. I mean, even within all higher education, that a place like this exists is kind of implausible with all of the metrics that we all know so well about social mobility and the first generation students and students from low income levels who manage to be transformed in their time here and who transform all of us. I agree with what you said about Josh. We're very lucky to have such leadership, and needless to say, the partnership with the TLC has been really fantastic. So I'm not going to say anymore because I can already hear my voice is wavering. So I'm just going to read. The Campus Crisis Toolkit begins with a disaster story that, like all good dystopias, is designed to warn us about the terrible possibilities looming ahead unless we are wary, prepared, and ready to defend ourselves. The name of this case study is West Virginia University. I still remember exactly how I learned about this impending crisis. It was from a tweet by Derek Krisoff sometime in the spring of 2023, announcing that he was resigning from the position of director of West Virginia University Press. I was stunned, and I took this news personally because of my own commitment to higher education transformation. I use that word strategically. I was reading and discussing with fellows, Futures Initiative fellows and colleagues, the inspiring books published by West Virginia University Press, especially the outstanding series, Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. When Christina Katapodis and I were writing the New College Classroom, we were reading a number of these crucial books in that series and discussing them almost daily, from Kevin Gannon's own Radical Hope to Susan D. Blum's remarkable and revolutionary Ungrading. When Jody Green and I were writing about faculty leadership and institutional transformation, constructive change in destructive times, again, our go-to was West Virginia University Press. Transformation, yes. What higher education can be and should be. Here were scholar teachers committed to active learning, equitable teaching. These are paraphrases of all the titles. Rethinking traditional disciplinary boundaries, research that matters in the world, teaching in the age of technology, teaching about race and racism, ensuring the success of all students in the classroom and beyond, and teaching the whole student. What our colleague Candice Chu, I'm listening to Candice Bergen's audiobook right now. Candice Chu has phrased as the people in our classrooms who are students. I just love that phrase, the people in our classrooms who are students. So it was shocking to me to learn that this visionary press director, Derek Krissoff, was resigning. And resigning because the entire R1 flagship campus of the state of West Virginia was about to be gutted by the superstar president, Gordon Gee, and with a plan he called, wait for it, the West Virginia University Academic Transformation Plan. It was sickening, positively sickening, that word and our progressive and ideas and ideals were being used in perfectly Orwellian fashion as a cudgel to destroy the university. As Lisa D. Bartolomeo writes in her stunningly candid essay on what happened at West Virginia University, President Gee and Provost Marianne Reed issued a charge to transform the university, but it was, quote, soon clear that transformation would be synonymous with retrenchment. What happened at West Virginia University, what's happening all over the US, is the opposite of transformation. It's retrograde affirmation of a reactionary status quo that serves no one, not students, not faculty, not society. We need solidarity and self-defense in the face of this onslaught. But, and this is one reason I love this book so much, we also need much, much more than defense. Somehow, amid all of this, we need to passionately reaffirm our own ideals, our own commitment to meaningful transformation, to what at the Futures Initiative we like to call the university worth fighting for. We need the Campus Crisis Toolkit. Kevin, Lisa, I want to say this to you personally and publicly. I love this book. To me, it is one of the most optimistic and inspiring books I've read in the last few years. I'm deeply appreciative. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how, in the midst of the crisis and trauma you were going through, including being laid off, fired, whatever word you want to use, by your university, that you managed to write a book that was so generous to your readers, that offers your readers actual, specific, skillful plans for fighting back. That, to me, is almost unheard of in academia. I'm deeply personally grateful to both of you. I'm impressed by your book, by your own work, by that of your contributors. You have every reason to write with fury and resentment, and you do. I mean, there's a lot of fury in the book. Beyond that, you also offer all of us as readers community, strength, courage, optimism, and even hope, all of which are needed for restoring and rebuilding what's left. You offer us excellent tools for how to fight back in meetings, in classrooms, with concerned alumni and policymakers, with the general public, and in the press. I especially love all the ways that all of you in the Campus Crisis Toolkit engage students in understanding and fighting for the core mission of higher education, fighting for their campus, fighting for their future. Students want transformation. Most college students are over 18. That means they are in school voluntarily. No one can make them go to college. No one can make them finish college. They are making a huge life commitment to stay with the program to graduate. And we know we humans are terrible, terrible at voluntary activities that are supposed to be good for us in the long run. Yet our students remain in school because they have tacit faith in us, a tacit faith in the belief that their participation in this educational process will result in their own transformation, that they will gain something they did not have before, that they will learn in college, that what they learn in college will prepare them for a meaningful and sustaining life beyond. They deserve to learn about and from the polycrisis threatening not just their education, but their future. I love the way so many of the authors in the Campus Crisis Toolkit have found ways to invite students so that students themselves can learn the tools of collaboration, agency, leadership, effective communication, and democratic solidarity that can contribute to successful actions and sometimes even solutions. These are exactly the skills that will serve students well in the long run. Skills that employers insist in survey after survey after survey that they want in college graduates. By contrast, and in a very penetrating analysis of the high-priced consultants brought in to dismantle higher ed, Kevin Gannon notes that although educational consultants frequently justify their slash and burn tactics as necessary and relevant to the changing needs of students, in fact, most consultants, and he's done the research on this, literally know nothing about student success, effective teaching and learning, or anything that might touch on the actual mission of the university. The loud and clear message of the Campus Crisis Toolkit is if your administrators say they are calling in outside consultants, fight back. Even better, the authors in this remarkable volume offer us myriad ways, political, philosophical, pedagogical, and practical, to do this and also to regroup and rebuild a higher education that truly does serve its students, faculty, and society. In the wonderful book Teaching Community, Bell Hooks writes, and this is a quote, "When we only name the problem, when we state complaint without a constructive focus or resolution, we take hope away. In this way, critique can become merely an expression of profound cynicism, which then works to sustain dominator culture." End of quote. Luke, thank you so much for you and your colleagues at the Teaching and Learning Center for bringing us here together today to celebrate and discuss this important book and these powerful, transformative ideas. Kevin and Lisa, you have given us constructive focus and resolution, as Bell Hooks says, a toolkit that moves us beyond despair and complaint to skillful and strategic resistance, change, and transformation. Yours is an enormous gift. On behalf of all of us here, thank you for being here and thank you for this great book.
Thank you so much, Cathy. It means a lot coming from you, given your contributions in this area and the model that you've set in your career. So glad to have you here. I'd now like to bring up the panelists. You have introductions, or you have biographies on the handout that you got when you walked in. I'm going to read a bridge version of these for those who are tuned in online. Lisa Bartolomeo is a Singer Hill Professor Emerita of Humanities at West Virginia University, where she ran the Russian program until the Department of World Languages was eliminated. She now works for a national environmental organization. Lisa, come on. Kevin Gannon is the director of the Center for the Advancement of Faculty Excellence, CAFE, and professor of history at Queen's University, Charlotte, not to be confused with Queen's University, Queens. Queens College in Queens. He's author of Radical Hope, a teaching manifesto, and with Lisa is co-editor of the Campus Crisis Toolkit. Joel Christensen is provost and senior vice president for academic affairs at the Graduate Center and a professor of classics. Previously, he was professor of classical and early Mediterranean studies at Brandeis University. His books include A Beginner's Guide to Homer, The Many-Minded Man, The Odyssey Psychology, and the Therapy of Epic, and Story Life on Epic, Language, and Living Things. Robin Isserles is professor of sociology at Borough of Manhattan Community College and here at the Graduate Center. She's the author of The Costs of Completion, Student Success in Community College. She also co-edited an online series on community colleges for teachers, College Record, and co-edited the special print issue, Reimagining the Multiple Missions of the Community College. And finally, Amy Wan is professor of English and special assistant to the provost on writing at the CUNY Graduate Center in Queens College. Her book, Producing Good Citizens, Literacy Training in Anxious Times, analyzes citizenship, literacy, and the productive worker citizen in the United States. Her current book project is Beyond an Institution Adrift, the third current of writing at CUNY in the 21st century, an edited collection with Todd Craig and Neil Meyer, which is forthcoming from the WAC Clearinghouse. So round of applause for our distinguished panelists, each of whom I've learned from as colleagues and friends in a variety of ways, and I'm just really looking forward to the conversation. I want to start by asking Kevin and Lisa just to tell us a bit about the book's origins and what you learned putting it together. You have to turn your mic on.
I guess we have to go back to someone Luke brought up and Cathy brought up, Derek Krisoff, without whom this volume would not have happened. as I was sort of in the wilderness of rage and trauma and disbelief and betrayal, Derek reached out and said, I think you should write about this, and I want to help you get that started. And as we started talking about it, he said, I have a friend named Kevin, and I want to introduce you. And that was really where it started. So without Derek, this would not have happened. But I mean, I guess we have to credit Gordon Gee and Marion Reed and their mistakes, the WVU mistake hashtag, for starting all of this and for turning West Virginia University into the canary in the coal mine. That hopefully, just because we died doesn't mean that other folks have to do as well. Kevin, you want to add anything?
No, that's very well said. Thank you. And yes, another shout out to Derek, who really was kind of the intellectual godfather of this project. And I'll just add that when Derek reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have a friend who's at West Virginia, and you might have heard about some things happening," I was like, "Yeah." He said, "I'd like to connect the two of you. I think she's interested in working on a project, and I think that there's a lot more to say even beyond West Virginia's context." And I yell on the internet a lot about higher ed, and so I was interested. And yeah, it was. I mean, the project seemed a natural, if that's not a great thing, in general, but it has been a restorative project, if that makes any sense, because academia is a highly individualizing culture if you let it be. And what I learned from my partnership with Lisa, but also with all of our authors, is that it can look different, and often does look different. And when we remind ourselves of that and lean into that, then we're in a place where the more just and more sustainable vision for our future through a revitalized higher education can happen. So the book was our attempt to gather like-minded folks and not just talk about, obviously the toolkit piece is central. We want people to be able to use the experiences and wisdom and perspective of folks who've gone through these types of things, because they are or will happen at most campuses in the country. But we also wanted to make a statement about this is what people working in solidarity with one another can do. And so I'll shout out again, the through line through the book is, it's community, it's solidarity, it's common purpose, it's a commitment to what higher education should be rather than what it often is. It's listening to our undergraduate students, our graduate students, our early career colleagues, our staff colleagues, our faculty colleagues. It's all of those voices coming together to say that too. And I'm just grateful for Lisa's co-editing and for all of our contributors who I think really nailed that part of it. And then we have an exhibit of what this can be rather than what it is. And as a historian, I often am looking in the past, and certainly our present doesn't call up a lot of great associations. But what I also know is that authoritarian movements, because of their internal contradictions and because they're largely defined by incompetence, eventually collapse. And so I'm interested in what comes next, right? And I think we all have an interest in that. And I think we have an opportunity to model what could come next in a place where we can do that at scale and where that impact is quick. And so this is in many ways a book that critiques what is, but also looks to what next. And that's the part that I think we're really proud of and that our authors really made happen.
And if I can build on that, because I think Kevin was really on the spot to call out the through line of solidarity. As a Slavist, which I was until a couple of years ago, thinking about solidarity, thinking about Eastern European history, right? Over the course of the 20th century, the division between ordinary people, but in particular workers, and the elite at universities, at institutions of higher learning. And for years, the regimes in place were able to split those two and keep the public divided and stay in power by keeping the public divided. And I think that one thing that all of us can show is that we're not up here, we're not in the ivory tower, we're not staying at a remove from the everyday problems of people on the streets, whether it's in Minneapolis, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in Washington, D.C., whether it's in Puerto Rico, that we see those, we feel those, we are part of those. And I think if we can begin to demonstrate the solidarity that unites all of us in fighting oppression, in fighting the symptoms of totalitarianism, which I think are part and parcel of what's happening at all of our universities and colleges now, then we stand a chance. And that I think, if anything, the history of the 20th century has that to teach us. And that would be a ray of hope that I can see in our current circumstances, is if we can all come together, the people who are normally on two sides of the barricades, then we can actually overcome this moment and fix things.
Thank you for that. I want to kind of structure the discussion along three vantage points, right? One is the macro vantage point, looking at the system of higher education and how it exists within and across American society. The next is the meso level, right? How is it impacting us through our institutions, at the level of our disciplines and our fields, and then to ultimately settle on the micro level. How is it impacting our day-to-day, specifically in our classrooms and our relationships with colleagues and especially with students? So starting from this larger vantage point, and Joel, will go to you, how do you understand this question of the polycrisis? How does it show up for you?
All right, I'll try not to take too long. What I really like about the term polycrisis is, first, it's Greek. But also, crisis in its original Greek sense is probably better translated as an inflection point. It's an opportunity to make a judgment and to make a change. And so the poly part of it, though, rather than focusing on all the crises happening at once, one of the things that I reflect on is how crisis has been engineered from without for a very long time. I don't remember being in higher ed not being in crisis. My second week of grad school here in New York City was 9/11. My second month as a faculty member at UT San Antonio was the financial crisis of 2007. My first semester teaching at Brandeis was the election of Trump, right? And so there's lots of advice in this book I wish I'd had on those days. But at the same time, if we're thinking about the systemic problems, we need to go back farther, right? Because what I see in especially what's happened since this book was put together, since the new Trump administration, is the very powerful reimposition of white supremacy. That is a paroxysm that's been going on since we allowed everyone into higher ed. Right. So when I look back to post-GI Bill, which not everyone could apply to, but both my grandfathers got, and then what happened in the 60s and 70s and the divestment from higher ed in the 80s. And at the same time, the culture wars, especially the humanities, if I think back to Bloom's work and stuff, what I see there is a weaponization of tradition and Western culture in a reaction against the radical notion that everyone should have access to the creation of knowledge. And so if you look at legislation in the 80s and 90s, a couple key things happened, right? The way that we structured student loans and the funding of higher ed as we divested from it could have been very different. We could have had legislation that said, all right, the max you can do for loan funding is 1%, right? Instead, we farmed out to corporate interests, and we have people who are paying 7, 8, 9% interest, and people are making a lot of money off of our people, right? And the same time that was happening, we changed bond laws, right? So higher education nonprofits didn't used to be able to take out massive bonds to buy and build, but that was done at the same time. And these the seeds of our current financial crises go back to those decisions, right? I mean, not to add to the crisis, but this book doesn't mention the crisis in Gaza. It doesn't mention the influence of mega donors. It can't really get to that because that happened later. But all these things are connected to the choice that was made in our society to not fund education for everybody. And so when I'm thinking back to the Polycrisis and how I got involved in administration, I'm thinking about the root causes and how we match our actions and commitment to mission against those challenges, right? And not to point again to how awesome we are in CUNY, right? But no, there are certain public institutions now have the unique advantage of not being vulnerable to those same problems. Right? I mean, we all have stories. I've only been here 6 months, but we all have stories about the the Byzantine systems that we have running in the city and state that make CUNY possible and impossible simultaneously. Right? But we also charge $7,000 a year for tuition. Right? And we're doing it at a level from the community college to the ASRC where nobody else in the country can match it. And so to go to the hope thing, right? So first diagnosing the problem, like at some point, it's politics, it's racism, it's money. What's the solution? It's something like what we're doing, right? We are already doing things in a way that doesn't make us vulnerable to the same forces. How do we teach others how to do this? How do we protect it against the encroachment of political forces? And how do we benefit from other people's suffering? Right. I mean, WVU is a perfect example of ideology, of the toxic combination between ideology and incompetence. And that's the thing that I'm tracking when I'm looking at other people's responses to crisis. Most of the financial cuts you're looking at are what I call performative cuts, right? Because we've been forced to manage on a quarterly cycle as if we're businesses. Right? And higher ed, I actually think, is good at responding to a crisis in short term. And I saw this during COVID, right? But in long term, we're hamstrung by the financial situation.
Thanks, Joel. Robin, how does the Polycrisis show up for you? How do you understand it?
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So I speak from the perspective of public higher ed. I've spent my entire career at a community college, and this is a voice that we don't often hear about, or a set of experiences. So what I'm struck with is how narrowed a sense of what's possible for the students and for the faculty and staff for what they envision higher ed to be. We're seeing this now, I think, with the heavy efforts of workforce development, which really, really is often targeted at our community colleges. And it's such an opposition to the beautiful words that Cathy started us off with this evening about what transformation is possible in higher ed. I see this as part of Wendy Brown, the political theorist, her work on the neoliberal assault of higher ed. And I think a lot of that speaks out of the pages of this book, a narrowing notion of what student success is from people very divorced from a university setting, the privatization of all that we know of to be the public good, especially our universities. As we started democratizing our public higher ed, that's when we saw a real diminishment of state funding across the country. And what we allowed in were, grants from private philanthropies who often set the agenda of what we wanted to know about, certainly the community college, but I think public education too. So there's a narrowing, and I don't mean to be just negative. There is hope. And again, that is one of the, I think, really important parts of this book, was that we see in so many ways the stage gets set in so many different higher ed environments, the attempts at fighting back, some successful, some were not. And I really appreciated the not stories, because we don't hear that. It's like we don't hear when data is bad because it's just under the rug, but like we have to know when the data is bad because that's how we learn. Well, we have to learn from what didn't work as we think of higher ed at the systemic level, but also the other levels. So, I think another aspect of this, but I'm not sure it belongs at the macro level, but I kind of think it does. I saw so many parallels between how students feel invisible and how faculty feel invisible, how students feel disregarded and how faculty feel disregarded. And I'm especially tuned to this as a member of a community college environment. And so I'll stop there so we can hear from everyone.
I don't know if I have that much more to add than what everyone else has already said, but I mean, one of the things that struck me just as I was reading this text, I'm like so grateful for it just because of the specificity that it offers, which is so many chapters of people's kind of like unique conditions, but also the ways that we're sort of experiencing a shared set of conditions. And I think the book really, Kevin, you were talking about solidarity. I think it was you, right? And I think that in some ways, this is what the book is offering us, is a sense of solidarity among all of us who are at many different institutions. I think just in terms of like thinking about the macro, I was really struck by Lisa Corrigan has a chapter where she talks a lot about public good. And I think one of the things that I feel like I'm constantly thinking about is like, how do you make an argument for a public good, for thinking about education as a public good, when that idea is really of any public good right now in the United States is so diminished. And like, what is the argument that we make for ourselves? How do we articulate that to people who are legislators who are funding us, are in some cases upper administrators who we're trying to make arguments for our various programs. It just feels like, but I do think one of the things that the book kind of spoke to me about was just like thinking about how our students are experiencing this as well, and like how we can really build that solidarity with them, and thinking about like, okay, if we're thinking about a public good, like how can we involve students in that discussion, because they're really the people who we should be in conversation with when we're trying to make these arguments.
Great, thank you. Does anyone want to respond to a thread that one of your fellow panelists started? Or I don't want to ask all the questions here, so feel free to jump in.
I mean, I will add that the whole disinvestment and thinking about the way that politics comes into what's happening on our campuses, and the way that it's woven through this book and just our day-to-day experiences. I think one of the things that we want to think about when we're thinking about the macro level, which is just can feel so overwhelming and like out of our control, because all of these things seem to be happening to us and we don't have that influence, and or we can, but there's just it's almost like a whack-a-mole situation where there's just so many things to be worried about. But I think one of the things that this book does, and I talked about the specificity of it before, is like it really gives you a sense of making sure or thinking about like what is it that we can and can't do, and to kind of like stem that feeling of being overwhelmed. Because there's plenty to do, right? So.
Yeah. And I guess my next question builds upon that. Is that obviously we don't go through our days thinking crisis. I mean, so Joel, you might as a provost, but we teach our classes, we run our meetings, we read for our research, we read for pleasure, and not. I mean, this book is necessary for a reason, and that reason is that not enough people are having this conversation, or not enough people have the realization of the arguments in this book. So how do we, and maybe for Kevin and Lisa, is what do you want people to do with this book, right, with the recommendations in it? How do you imagine that the notion of crisis is going to become more present, or do you hope for it to become more present in our diagnosis and our actions?
I think probably the main goal actually harkens back to what Cathy gave us from bell hooks, right? The idea that, it's one thing to sort of name crises, but you can't just sit there, right? And what I think our hope is that you need to be rigorously honest about where you stand, right? Because if you can't be honest about where you are, you're going to lie to yourself about where you want to be. But the rigorously honest part is, it's tough, but it is also something that can be the off-ramp too, because it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. It's very easy to feel like I am just one person in a sea of polycrisis. What can I possibly do? I'm just going to keep my head down, teach my class, whatever. And when you surrender your agency, that's it, right? And so I think what I'm hoping this book does is it allows people space to honestly reckon with where they are and where higher education is, but in ways that are not overwhelming in the sense of being isolated, but ways that might look overwhelming, but there are more of us than there are them, right? That's where I want people to end up with that. And again, we keep referencing the climate we're in. Authoritarian movements succeed when they convince you to give up their agency or your agency. And so there's an ethical imperative not to do that just simply for that reason, right? But agency and understanding that we have it, the same thing we're trying to get our students to tap into as learners, right? Meaningful learning happens when students see themselves as actual agents in that process. Meaningful change happens, systemic and cultural change, when we see ourselves as agents in that process. And we have, higher ed's a weird place. Higher ed has some cultural issues that have prevented the type of community and solidarity that we advocate for. But higher ed also has a lot of factors that can promote and grow that community and solidarity. And that's what I'm hoping this book does for folks, is people who are trying to answer that question in their own context and find community and find solidarity can be heartened and instructed by what worked, what didn't work, why people tried things, what other things they might want to try. Because the one through line that does run through this is no one's doing this alone. We have undergraduate students who wrote about starting an undergraduate student union at West Virginia. It's all of our job. And so to the point about, incorporating more student voice and really, our adjunct and precarious status colleagues, right? There are a lot of structural barriers to community and solidarity, but they're there for a reason. And I know that makes me sound kind of tinfoil hat a little bit, but they are, right? It's a strategy of division. It's controlling labor costs. And we know how that works, right? And so what I'm hoping that through line of solidarity and community does for readers is to remind us of all of the assets that we do have and all of the tools that we do have to build something different, to build something better. But we have to be the builders. No one else is going to do that.
I would build on that by noting that while this book does specifically address crises in higher education, its usefulness and its application is not limited to higher education. And I think all of us in this room are wrestling not only with crises on our own campuses, but also in our own communities, maybe in our own families, maybe in our faith communities, maybe in our neighborhoods, maybe at the favorite restaurant down the street. And I think this sense of community, this sense of connection, this sense of solidarity in what we're all going through, both in our professional lives, if we're academics, but also in our personal lives, and more broadly in our national life. And while it may seem that some of these essays are particularly limited to the educational sphere, I think that we can all take something away from this. I know I did in moving from academia to environmental work. The work I did organizing on my campus, which ultimately failed, in trying to work with folks to start a faculty union, helped me figure out how to organize in my current job. And I think, again, for the students who tried to organize that way, but also for the students who learned that they had some agency and were then able to take that attempt at starting a student union on campus and will go out into the world and will be really kick-ass individuals, they can take that beyond the classroom. And that would be my hope, is that it's for those of us who work with students, but also we can take it to the streets.
Actually, I want to ask you a follow-up question on that, Lisa. One of the challenges that we persistently face here at the Graduate Center is how we prepare the future professoriate, not knowing if there's going to be a future professoriate or what it's going to look like, right? And how we prepare students to be flexible and how they apply the knowledge that they glean here. You referred to yourself as a former Slavicist.
Yeah.
I mean, once you are one, aren't you one for
Right,
life? But I
right.
guess my question to you is how now that you've left the institution, how you relate to your discipline. How do you understand the work in the field? How does it are you still reading in the field? How are you feeling about it?
I guess I'm ambivalent because I'm not reading as much in the field. I did do an academic conference for the Slavic field last fall, and it was pretty surreal, I have to say, being back. It was painful. But I think it also showed me that my set of skills was not simply limited to teaching Russian or teaching a class about vampires or teaching a class about the Holocaust in Eastern European literature and film. That I had skills and I had knowledge and I had talents that, because of my training in the humanities in particular, were easily applicable, maybe not easily, but that I could apply to other work. And none of us goes into academia. None of us gets a PhD thinking, oh, okay, I'll do this for a couple of years. I was a professor for, I guess, all told, 25 years. I taught for a few years at Pitt and 19 at WVU, which was my undergraduate alma mater. And none of us thinks that that's a temporary investment. But I guess the affirmation that I got was that I actually was good for something else. And that was a surprise. And it was scary. But that's something that I would hope that students can see too, is that they're good for more than just one thing.
Thank you. And just want to share, Cathy's note commending your bravery and appreciation for your honesty about your experience, and that connects with Kevin's idea that we need to be honest about what the stakes are, what the risks are, and do more of that, especially in training doctoral students. So my next question is about professional organizations, your field, the research questions that people are pursuing. How is it showing up for each of you? And maybe we'll start with Amy this time and work this way.
I mean, I think that, I'm in the field of rhetoric and composition. So a lot of the work that I do personally is about these questions of is historical and sort of how how higher education and thinking about writing specifically got to be how it is. I think in terms of like the larger field, I mean, I don't know. I think that as a field, we're probably like very engaged in thinking about these questions of crisis, but I don't know. I think that there are kind of different movements, and it feels like we all have some contribution to make. But I'm thinking specifically about, and maybe because I'm writing about this a little bit, but I'm thinking about the the genre of the statement, right, of the professional organization statement when it comes to, so like some crisis comes up and like, we're going to put together a statement and like put it out. And just as a rhetorician, thinking about what the force of that is and then what it does and what it doesn't do, I think is important for us to figure out, because I think that just personally, sure, I've signed statements, I've been like involved in writing them, but also thinking about what political action means beyond that. And I think that is the that is what is in this book, right? It's political action. It is kind of thinking about how you move in these smaller spaces like your classroom or within your department, but also like recognizing that like what is happening at the Supreme Court or at, and in other countries, and and the whole idea of borders, right? Like all of this is working together. I don't know, that's very mushy, but I feel like yeah, just thinking about like what is it that we can do to intervene and what are our obligations, I think is something that I don't know, is my professional organization taking it up in various ways and to varying degrees. But I do feel like as a field, I feel pretty, I don't know, like good about the work that my peers are doing, which I think is nice. But I don't know, I'm also in English department, and I think that not that there's anything wrong with English department. So I think that there are kind of like varying senses of obligation sometimes, even within my own field. I don't want to like say like everyone in Comp Ed is amazing, but like there is that feeling of like, I'm here to do scholarship, I'm here to do my own work, and these other things are distractions, but they, we have to recognize that like your own work is on the backs of other people, right? And so we're kind of all in this together. That was not answering your question.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what came to mind.
So my discipline is all about systemic crisis. I'm a sociologist, and trying to understand the structural forces that lead to, persistent inequalities. It's all crisis. So, I live in my professional world, but again, as a community college faculty and scholar, I'm overlooked. It's often not assumed that I do research. So there's that weirdness in my positionality, which is why I wrote the book that I did. So to answer your question simply, I think there's a lot of really good work that is happening and has happened, especially in the sociology of education, trying to grapple with whether higher ed is a place of maintaining our class system or transforming it, or both, and how. But in thinking about your question more, I guess, at the meso level, I was struck by so many of the articles that talked about shared governance and the importance of it. And so this is cross-disciplinary boundaries, obviously. But I think that part of the immiseration of faculty life, right, the contingent faculty, the non-tenure track faculty, the silos between faculty and staff, faculty governance has suffered. And as such, our ability to articulate what we want, what our visions are, what we are hoping to do has suffered. I don't want to speak for CUNY. At my institution, especially in the era with so many untenured faculty, and yes, we do get tenure at a community college. It's part of being at CUNY. Many other places that doesn't happen. But our, faculty governance, the faculty committees were populated by untenured faculty, because it was for their service, and it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, they didn't have a voice to articulate, some of the crisis as it was hitting the institution, to talk back. Well, what does it mean that we're adopting EAB's Navigate? EAB is kind of horrendous about faculty. Like, can we stop that? But we had untenured faculty who were sitting and populating. And I think that's a story that we need to be looking at and being honest about as we think about what's next. And it's not because tenured faculty were not interested. I'll just say that, or disengaged. That actually doesn't happen as much as we're led to believe that happens. It was actually to try to support our untenured faculty, give them service so that they would get tenure. But I think it does not serve us well. So how do we create solidarity in our professional organizations, in our own school communities at that level? Especially when we feel so disconnected by our disciplinary, territories. Again, the status, I forget the essay that spoke about the non-tenured, the non-tenured track faculty feeling so disregarded by their tenure track. That spoke to me again as a community college faculty, where we feel that with faculty who are not at the community college. And those are the bridges I think we need to really start to mend, pay attention to, be honest about, mend, and of course, doing that in concert with our students. Teaching the budget crisis, brilliant idea. We have a CUNY week where we're supposed to engage our students in all things CUNY. It's sad. I'm a third generation part of this institution, and it saddens me that most of my students don't know the glorious history of CUNY. So I try to bring it in whenever I can. And I think that that's probably true of a lot of undergraduates and perhaps faculty and staff too. But teaching the history of our institutions, teaching a budget crisis or what they claim to be. And that can be done, as easily in a math or an eco class as it can in a sociology or a rhetoric class. So I think that that's some of the work that we want to think about doing in our organizations, in our institutions.
Thank you, Robin. Joel?
So for those of you who don't know, I'm a classicist. And to say that my field has been a dumpster fire over the past decade, I think is an understatement. But as with most things as a classicist, I got to go back further. Since Martin Bernal published Black Athena in 3 volumes in the 90s, my field has been in sort of a constant navel-gazing self-reckoning. And this has reached much higher pitches over the past decade. And it falls into a couple basic arguments, right? You can look out today, any newspaper, and you'll see something about Western civilization and the combination of the classics and Christianity. And it's becoming law in some states. And they're building ethics centers and civic centers that they're populating with faculty. And the question at the core of my field is, do we cheer this on because it means more classics, or do we oppose it? About 2 months ago, I was ready to not be a classicist anymore, right? Because the debate that emerged out of the 2000s and into the next decade was, are people misusing classics and appropriating it? Or is it a feature, not the bug of the program? Right? For those of us who really understand our field and the history, the debate has turned into a question of how it's used versus the structural assumptions inherent to the discipline that have been, handmaidens to colonialism, racism, and neo-imperialism. We can't deny that the selective preservation of information from the past, or how we approach it and how it's been integrated in the research university, has not been essential to the operation of colonialist nation states. That's the center of the debate of my field. And then it goes back to the small things, right? When Jeremy Wayne Tate comes out with the classical learning test, when DeSantis wants New College to teach the Odyssey, when Rufo's all about, we need to teach more epic because people need to be like Odysseus. Right. Fact is, we are too much like Odysseus. And that's part of the problem, right? And the people say, don't rock the boat, because then classics will die. And that's where we get into the problem of disciplinarity, and where I want to think more about solidarity and what it means when we pit our disciplines against each other. But I just said 2 months ago, I was ready to give up. But then I went to our annual meeting I got elected to be VP of programs for my organization, which is ironic because I hate the annual meeting. I've never understood what it's for, but I went, and our president, who's Kirk Ormond, is from Oberlin. He had a panel of people from mostly minoritized and marginalized background talk about their visions for classics in the future. And then he gave a keynote that was supposed to be about the archaic poet Archilochus and the power of invective as a type of dissent. But it was the day after the first murder by ICE in Minnesota. And he stood up and he talked about the talk he wanted to give, started to show pictures of protesters in frog costumes and about the tradition of absurd invective. And he broke down in tears. And he talked about how much it meant to him that he had to stand up as president to defend his trans colleagues and his colleagues who didn't have visas, and how what he learned from the humanities that was his mission. And so that interpersonal confession, that acknowledgement that the humanities haven't done what they're supposed to do, made me think, well, maybe there's still a little hope here. And so I guess, I feel that my responsibility is in part to keep pushing there and to keep learning from our colleagues and to not give up that ground, because if we cede it, we know what's going to happen.
Thank you. Kevin, Lisa, do you want to add anything?
Sorry. No, I don't think I can add anything to that.
So let's turn to the classroom and to our relationships with students and to pedagogy. And and anyone can jump in. How has your pedagogy, your teaching, changed over the past decade as the crises have piled up?
I don't even remember what it was like before that, like in the before times. I mean, isn't it amazing, right? Like there are things that feel simultaneously 2 minutes and 20 years ago. And I don't know how that works except for time as a flat circle. But I think what I have really struggled with is understanding and honoring the urgency behind effective pedagogy, and not effective as in my tips and tricks are great and students participate all the time, but rather, am I creating a space where all of us can be humans learning from one another, from other things together? Am I able to create that space and feel the urgency behind that, right? Because the thing that gives me the most hope in higher ed is that what we lack are alternative models of what things could be rather than what things are. How do we model the future we want instead of the present we have? And so feeling that urgency coming, what I really struggle with is to not take myself too seriously and to not make my students in front of me like some sort of prop in my noble crusade to use higher ed to save society. And not that I think in those grandiose terms, but I feel really sensitive to my positionality. I'm a loud middle-aged white guy. I present in certain ways. Like all of those things really can impact the type of teaching and learning space that it's my job to curate or to start, but not to manage, nor to say when it stops. And so the balance of treating what I do with and among my students with the proper amount of urgency and respect without letting that be a consuming, exhausting thing for either me or my students is the way in which I struggle the most right now. But on the flip side of that, through the ongoing fascist hellscape and some personal life developments, I have found myself much more open to just giving up control, which I always said was a good thing to do teaching. And I've always talked to instructors about it can be really liberating if you give up control, but it turns out I don't really like to do that. But I'm better at it now. And it is liberating. And all the things I was saying to others, even when I was being hypocritical, are actually true. So that's nice for me to learn. But but giving up control, like, does that make things less urgent? Is this larger goal going to happen, right? And so trying to keep that balance and be human about it, and give myself and my students grace in that period. Those are the things I think about a lot. Those are the things I struggle with. Those are aspirations, but they are often not the reality. And so trying to close that gap remains at the heart of the work. But in the climate in which this work is unfolding, where we have the opportunity to create those models, right, for students, where this is what true community can look like. This is what diversity really is and really means, and how it's a strength and how it's a power. Like, can I create spaces where students see what that looks like concretely? If we're doing that, then we're going to be okay. But as you can tell, I overthink it a lot too. So
Can I actually, like, this is a question for you, because I'm thinking about, Kevin, what you just said, and Joel, what you just said, and it seems like what's shared is like this sense of being clear about what the implications are about what we're doing, whether that's like within our field or in the classroom, and to maybe like tie it back to what I said earlier about the sense of public good, right? We're trying to, in classrooms, like build that sense with our students, and to whatever it is, whatever topic we're teaching, to have students and me as a teacher feel like, okay, we're doing something here that actually has meaning outside of just this classroom space. And I guess I'm just wondering, how do we make that happen more, and how do we make the argument that aspect is important? And I think, like, Luke, you talk to a lot of teachers and new teachers, and I don't know, if you feel like that is kind of just baked into the whole thing. I feel like it's hard because I'm thinking specifically, I work with a lot of part-time instructors at Queens, and it's in some ways like it's a time and labor issue, right? To think about, to be able to have this with your students. And so, yeah.
So great question. And it's really at the heart of what we try to do every year at the TLC. We're training new doctoral students before they go out and teach their first courses at CUNY. And we're doing so after the most intense year of reading that they've ever had, their first year of graduate school. And they're being asked now go translate this for students who don't and won't have the same connection to your discipline that you have. And we have to do it in just a few days. So what, at least to start, and what we focus on ultimately is articulating that it's a possibility, that all of the structures that we've received, from grading to curriculum to the semester to the twice a week meetings, that none of these are ordained, right? And that the power and responsibility and opportunity that we have as an instructor is to work within and against those structures. And so to have a questioning mindset when you go into thinking about how you want your students to engage with the material. And that looks very different across 31 doctoral programs, across 11 senior college campuses, depending on what you're teaching, depending on the positionality of the instructors. But yeah, I think our goal is to kind of see the idea, and then to see where it goes. And many of the students come back, some we never see again. But we hope that those who will go on to a career as teachers, as professors, or as teachers outside of the academy as pedagogues, that they have that core truth that we take from critical pedagogy. So that's how we approach it.
So my book came out in 2021. And just as I was returning to the classroom, as fast as I could after COVID quarantine were lifted. So those two things happening at the same time, I just spent a lot of years thinking about what I called the neoliberal reform movement was doing to our community college students. This push to get them to complete made school completely joyless. And so coming back from COVID, being in person, even with masks, and trying to make to think about how to make the classroom a joyful place for students who for who it wasn't for a really long time, as they were pushed to take more and more classes just so that they would get across the completion mark. So I am determined each and every classroom to try to create a space for joy in whatever way that means. At the community college, a lot of students, different from a dorming situation, they don't think that school is for making friends. They tell me all the time, I'm not here to make friends. They're very serious about the fact that they are in school, and they take it seriously, but it's divorced from some of the social aspects and the really important aspects of learning. So I'm trying to kind of help them think about that in a different way. And that means, putting them in groups and always, that curiosity about what are we thinking about, what did we read about, what are we writing about. But joy, I think, is really central. And I think that the higher ed in general has really moved away from joy. And I thought a lot about this reading the book. And I think that, department meetings need to be a little more joyful, and Senate meetings need to be a little more joyful, and union meetings need to be a little more joyful, and labor management meetings need to be a little bit more joyful, as I sit in all of those places. But the learning comes from something we enjoy, and we have joy. And so I think, and, for students who, there's a lot of competing things going on in their lives that make school really difficult to persist. And so how do we make the place that they're going to spend every Wednesdays from 11 to 1:45 something they want to keep coming back to, or to try to prioritize it among these other competing things in their lives? And I'm going to bet on joy. I would say right now that I'm on sabbatical, so I don't have to think about this right now, thankfully. Thank you, contract. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, especially in the current moment, about what does joy mean right now, and especially for my students who are vulnerable in so many ways when in this crisis. So more, I guess, to think about.
I wasn't going to say anything, but Robin, you were talking about joy, and I'm looking at a former undergrad student of mine that is joyful. One of the most joyful and transformational teaching experiences I ever had was 2 semesters teaching in a maximum security prison in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, to men who, some of them had been in prison since they were 15 years old. And I taught those 2 semesters, and they were the most amazing students. They were the most amazing classes. And every week when I left that prison, going through razor wire, going through multiple layers of security, having to wear a special bra that didn't have an underwire in it because it would set off metal detectors, I came out of those experiences getting the joy that those men felt. Reading Dracula, reading, books about the Holocaust, that showed me the power of education. And I think that's something that I take into my work now that I'm an organizer for Sierra Club, going into communities where people don't talk to people about their lived experience in frontline environmental justice communities in Southern West Virginia, where people cannot drink the water and have not been able to drink the water for decades, when they can't bathe in the water because it is poison. And going into communities like that and not approaching it as a teaching experience, but as a learning experience, for me, I think that's one of the places I find joy, and that enables me to connect to what I did for so long that I loved.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience, if anyone has one. Yeah, please.
I just had a question that is timely, and Joel probably will relate to this, but what are the accrediting bodies talking about, and how do faculty feel and administrators feel about what you are putting out there for these bodies? I guess that's been on our mind as we are approaching middle states here at the Grad Center.
Trying to choose my words very carefully. I think there's a future in which all the accrediting bodies collapse. I don't think that they are in tune with what we need to do in the future. And from what I've seen of their communications and their workshops and their conferences and their announcemements, is that their industry is in service of their industry and not in the goals of higher ed, at least not in ours. And so that's the most negative way of putting it. I think the responsibility, I think on my side of that, is to engage with them and try to convince them to be different, and to take I mean, we have to go through the process. We have to do it correctly. It's a compliance thing, right? And we should do it well if we're going to do it. But at the same time, I think that member organizations and institutions need to push back and ask what they're really accrediting through the processes. I mean, the amount of data collection, what we provide to them, the processes we go to, it could be meaningful.
I want to jump in because at Queens College, we are wrapping up our middle states accreditation right now. And I mean, the site visit is in a couple weeks, I think. Maybe it's in March. And the whole process has been the second time it's happened since I've been at Queens. And I do think that it's again, maybe choosing words carefully. I don't know who's online. So it is a process that feels indicative of kind of where higher ed is right now, because so much of it is about providing evidence, quantifying something that feels like not quantifiable. But I think that one of the things that I've taken away from this process as a writing program administrator, middle manager, is to try to make this process of assessing and gathering data and presenting it in a certain way work for the things that I care about at the college, and trying to have it be value driven for me. That there's a way to think about like, how am I shaping these assessments and presenting this data in a way that shows what it is that we care about as an institution, and particularly in my area. And I think that that's an important thing to take with you, that like it is this kind of accrediting process that is not driven by us, but it doesn't mean that it's an agency thing, right? Where we don't want to just like mindlessly just do the thing, but like, how can we make the process, I don't want to say work for us, but like, so we can get something out of it.
If I may add, I think that's really smart and a necessary addendum to what I said, because there are parts of it that can be helpful. And from my experience in doing it in my last institution, the site visit and engagement with our actual colleagues really can be meaningful. Because one of the things that I think is a general harm and challenge to the solidarity movement that we need in higher ed is how few of us actually know how other institutions work and what the norms are. Everywhere I've been thinks that they're special and like the way they do things is the right way, and that they do it that way, and that's the only way to do it. If I could take over ACE or ACLS or something and have a lot of money, I would just send faculty from every institution to other institutions for residencies so they could see how things work. What?
Summer camp.
Yeah, summer camp. No, but like for a year, because there are really good reasons why some institutions do what they do. But there are lots of things we just do because that's the way it's always been. And the way we are, closed off as institutions keeps us from seeing that. So that part of, the two parts of it, making it meaningful and making the process work for your institution is the best advice I think you can get. And then the second one, getting the experience and wisdom from our colleagues from other institutions who are part of the site visit can be really useful as well. Sometimes there's really bad advice. Right, I'll tell you offline some of the worst advice that I heard given to my my last institution. But again, it's gaining that larger perspective that can really help inform the decisions for our institution. That's useful.
I actually don't know what to do with this, but I'm going to tell a personal story. When I was on book tour for the New Education, the first stop I made was to an annual meeting of accreditors. And I went to the front of the podium, the stage, and I said, "You guys are going to hate me." And this pall fell over the audience. And I turned to the person who invited me. I said, what just happened? She said, "We invited you because we're desperate to change. And we thought that you might be able to help us." It had never occurred to me that accreditors wanted to change. But now when I think about that, when I think about what you're talking about, you know, at the way faculty can start talking and going to other institutions and reading your book, it might be possible to read, and especially since the Trump administration has this parallel accreditation system it's pushing, might be a time to where there actually could be some activism that happened in solidarity with accreditors. But that I can never forget that moment because it was a trauma. You know, I didn't mean it to be. I thought I was being funny, but it was they were traumatized that I thought of them as somehow the enemy and the other.
So I actually have a question from one of the Haystack scholars who's reviewing the book, and she asks, what advice does the panel give to scholars in training who are beginning their careers and navigating this moment? Nice softball.
I'll start. I go with my colleagues' advice here about joy. No, I'm serious. You know, we don't come to higher ed mostly to get rich and famous. I mean, I know some people do, but we come to it, you know, the joy of discovery, the joy of community and communion with people on similar paths, helping people, you know, gain, for lack of better terms, enlightenment. But finding that core and reminding yourself of it and sticking to it. I mean, even today, I spend half an hour to an hour every day doing a little bit of that, of reading some Homer, of chipping away at some stuff and reminding myself of what got me into this business, and then updating my own personal narrative, right? How does how I started make sense with what I'm doing now? And remembering that, you know, we need two things, right, to be happy or at least content as human beings. We need agency, which Kevin's talked about, right? We also need that sense of belonging. And I think so. The biggest thing that I think has made my career possible is finding that sense of mission within myself, and then relating the weird thing I do, reading Homer all the time, to the work that we share together.
There's a lot of things that are sort of running through my head, and I hope I'm not incoherent, and I will try to remain concise. But I think two things that I thought of. One, and this is a lesson I still struggle with, so it's aspirational in many ways. In my role as a faculty developer now, sometimes I run up against colleagues who, putting it generously, are a little jaded, perhaps a little tired of this. It's here's why everything sucks, students can't learn, you know, and stuff that really kind of rubs me the wrong way. But also, there's a reason, right? Everybody's got a story as to why they are where they are. And so the advice I would give is that, you know, if you're a junior scholar, you're starting out at an institution and you run up against somebody who's just telling you everything that's wrong and how students are, you know, horrible today as opposed to previous generations, that well, yeah, I mean, yes, but also remember that the very base level, they still care about their students. They're expressing that care in ways that are maladaptive, right? and that gap between what they're hoping is going to happen and what is actually happening, right? That misalignment, that's where burnout lives. And so I have really, as someone who has teetered on the edge of burnout over the last few years, I've had to really challenge myself to give more grace to colleagues who I used to find somebody else to talk to, right? Now, be judicious. These are people who will suck your energy dry if you give them a chance to. But I give my students grace. I need to give my colleagues grace. And so I would say that is an important one because it often seems as new faculty members, those are the first people we meet in the department for whatever reason, right? And then the second one is, let me just reemphasize joy. Like, it's not worth doing if it's not fun. And for so many of our students, schooling, as opposed to education, has been joyless. And they have been defined by other people, and they have been told that a grade point represents their worth and their knowledge. This stuff can be fun. It should be fun. And if it's not fun, we're doing something wrong. And so helping students find a joy, a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. So many of the things that we wrestle with as instructors now, about student engagement and motivation, joy is joy and curiosity. So what cultivated that with us, and how can we help our students find whatever their answer to the question is? Those are the two things. So beginning and end, right? Where is joy? How can we cultivate joy? And what happens when the joy is left? And how do we help that colleague maybe reconnect with that? So I'll stop there.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead, Robin.
So I'm glad everyone likes the joy idea. Very validating. So a few things. Read everything written by Mike Rose and Bell Hooks. Just put that out there. Expect to change, evolve, and mature, and try not to beat yourself up with mistakes that you make along the way. I am not the teacher I was when I started as an adjunct at my college that I teach now when I was 23 years old. I'm much older than that now. And I, give yourself grace about you will make mistakes. It's kind of like parenting. There's no guidebook. There are some very good books written, but not one that can take you through. And so I think there's that. And another thing that I want to mention, picking up on the care idea, and this also was inspired a little bit by some of the chapters, Luke's especially dealing with care. I think we want to tread carefully with the language of care. The way that it's often used in the university setting, creating a culture of care, is similar to that transformation that Guy was talking about at U. It's been co-opted. It's been divorced from its feminist principles about what care is and caring labor. What we do, we can love what we do. We could care deeply about what we do and the students we teach and the colleagues we have, but what we do is our labor. And that's really, really important to not forget. I think there's been lots of studies done on what's called the virtue script of certain mostly feminized professions, nurses, K through 12 teachers, the attendants on the flight attendants. And, these caring, the labor that they do is idealized. And we see this sometimes as what we hold up to be good teaching is an idealized version of the labor that we should be doing. And that's not a healthy way to think about what good teaching is. It's not healthy for the teacher, and it's not healthy for the students either. Glorifying a teacher who goes to the bedside of their student to give them their final exam in the hospital, as it is done. This is, raised as a, this is what the caring. That's not good caring. It's not good caring for ourselves or for our students. And so we do always want to remember that what we do, and I don't mean to diminish this at all, but what we do is labor. And I think that also will help us to stand up against some of the forces brought about in the book and that many of us are probably experiencing in our own institutions. We give up that ability to advocate for ourselves when we don't see what we do as work and as labor.
I think I would add to that if we can hold at the same time this sense of joy, I think we have to, this sense of joy with the understanding that it is labor, that it is a job, and that it's a job that exists within a faulty or failing system, because I think that there's a lot of, especially graduate students, who get into this because of the joy, and they feel like when there aren't particular kinds of jobs at the end, that it's like of their own, that it's their fault and it's a systemic issue, right? That there's scarcity when it comes to jobs, and so I think that it's important to kind of hold these two things together, because we need to.
Okay, I want to thank Amy and Robin and Joel and Kevin and Lisa for their really, really thoughtful comments, and Kevin and Lisa especially for coming to be with us today and for their work putting this volume in front of us. We'll be reading it and learning from it and building solidarity around it. So I'm just, as an author who has a chapter in the book, I'm really grateful to be in the company of the other authors and to have worked with Kevin and Lisa on this. So thank you all for coming.
Can I invoke editorial privilege for just
Sure.
a sec? We have some other chapter authors here in the group with us. And so if you could stand or raise your hand or somehow call attention to yourself, which you probably don't want to do. Thank you for being here and for your work. It's easy to co-edit a book when the contributors are amazing and doing amazing work. It is a joyful process. And we also want to add our thanks to Luke, to the TLC staff. There's a lot that goes into putting events together like this. So for the folks who are helping with tech, and for our online visitors, for your folks who helped at the registration table, for the folks who are helping put together the reception after this, our gratitude to everybody involved in that as well. This has been wonderful. So thank you all for giving of your time and your energy to come and hang out and talk about how we make things better.
Awesome. Thank you. So reception across the hall, drinks on us.